Hello and welcome to episode 190 of the Rollo and Slappy Show. Today is March 23rd, 2020. I am Rollo McFlugel and with me is Slappy Jones 2. We are both from McFlugel.com. The show notes page for this episode will be McFlugel.com/190, where you'll be able to find links to some of the things we talk about, also our sponsor LibertyMugs.com, and also how to check out our guest, who Slappy will introduce right now. So take it away, Slappy.
Yeah, thanks, Rollo. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Today's guest is a friend of ours who we came across on Twitter. He tagged us in some tweets, looked at his Twitter bio, and thought, damn, I need to get this guy on. We got to talk to him. So he is at MDVet4. He's MDVet4Peace. I imagine that's Maryland with the crab and the Canton, Baltimore. But his Twitter bio reads, "War is worse than hell. Innocents suffer in war. No party, just peace. Fallujah 04, Rutba 06, Nawa 09, Sangin 12, 0369, 0531. I'm sure that's some kind of military thing. I don't know. Fourth generation NCO. So, MD Vet, welcome to the Rollo and Slappy Show.
What's up, guys?
So, well, I'm looking at this Twitter bio. We sent him the DM. We said we want to get you on the show. He immediately agreed. I want to hear your story. It sounds like you've been in the military a long time. Fourth generation NCO sounds like it's been in your family for a long time. So, without being too specific or be as specific as you want, tell me about your upbringing. Were you a military guy moving all over the country? Tell us a little bit about that.
No, so I grew up in Maryland my whole life. I was born in Jersey. We moved then, but my dad was actually a fraud investigator for the DOD by the time I was born. He had just served in Vietnam, and I'll be honest, I fudged slightly because he made E5, but as a specialist, so he technically wasn't an NCO. But my grandfather and my great-grandfather both were sergeants in World War I and World War II, respectively.
So just to stop you, E5. I mean, if me being a civilian sounds like he got promoted 4 times.
Yeah. So the Army has a weird separation between they technically, you're not an NCO if you're not in a leadership position, a non-commissioned officer. So my father was a specialist, like a technical specialist. So that's kind of just in the weeds. My father, when I was growing up, was a fraud investigator for DOD, which is very interesting.
I was going to say that does sound interesting. Was he working in DC?
Yep. Yeah. He worked right across the street from the Pentagon. And, I would get a lot of stories even then about, I remember specifically, he had a big thing about honesty. And specifically, one of the earliest, clear memories of understanding his job was I got really upset in, 2nd or 3rd grade because somebody copied off my test or something stupid like that. And my father, with this thing for honesty, he came in and he brought in the standard Kevlar soldier's helmet. And it was one that he had used as evidence in a case. And the specific case was basically that the company that made helmets those should theoretically be made out of one continuous sheet. Every layer should be one sheet.
Sure.
But that would leave scraps. So the company would make every 100th helmet would be made out of scraps and was worth it. But they would kick that along and sell it anyways. And so even though it seemed just like a wise use of resources, probably the guy on the floor or somewhere along the way, it made sense to just kind of pass the buck along. But ultimately, if that little fib could be the difference between life and death for somebody at the end of the line. Wow. You know what I mean? So I remember clearly kind of there was that. My father was always a kind of constitutional conservative. And that was sort of my upbringing. And I grew up in Annapolis, which has the Naval Academy, and I was obsessed with airplanes, beyond what you could imagine. I had them all memorized. I had these I would get these, we would do what's called sponsoring a midshipman.
Okay.
they're away from home,
Mm-hmm.
and they can't really always go home for holidays at the Naval Academy. So, and they had these little things called rate books. When they were freshmen or plebes, they had to memorize these things. Like some of them were just these little stupid phrases they had to say, and other things were like the thrust to weight ratio of an F-14 Tomcat. You know, each engine produces X many thousand pounds of thrust, and the aircraft weighs this many pounds, and just weird stuff. Like I would memorize it. Like that's what my idols these did.
Yeah, sure.
And so that was most of my upbringing. Around late middle school, my vision went bad, and at the time, this is the late 90s, laser eye surgery wasn't really an option, and you couldn't fly if you didn't have 20/20 vision.
Right.
And propaganda, Top Gun had played a big role in this too.
Sure.
You know? I'd sort of developed a plan B over time of still going to becoming a Marine, because that was still, in fact, even better. And somewhere around probably 9th, 10th grade, my dad bought me a copy of, and I was thinking about this today because you asked about life story. Like, you could almost phrase a lot of it as this like battle for my soul between Tom Woods and Max Boot. First, with a book called, Thomas Ricks was the first one. He was sort of in that same neocon vein, though. And Tom Ricks wrote a book called Making the Corps, about how great the Marine Corps was and everything about Marine Corps boot camp. And I must have read that book through like 3 or 4 times when I was in high school. And I memorized everything about boot camp. I had it all laid out. I desperately wanted to be a Marine. And that just was the only plan, you know? When I got close to I graduated in 2002, so my senior year of high school is when 9/11 happened, and I'd already signed papers to go be what they call Marine Security Forces, the recruit on active duty.
So you had signed before September 11th?
Yep.
Yes, that was just your plan. Once high school was done, I'm going.
Yeah, as soon as you're 17 and finish your junior year, you could sign papers, and I signed papers like right that June when like junior year ended.
Sure.
So that would have been like, June 2001. I don't know when exactly this happened, but somewhere along that way, my father definitely he wanted me to go to college. He thought I would never have gone. He probably was right if I didn't start first. Mm-hmm. And so I changed my contract from being active security forces, which security forces is mainly all they do is babysit nukes. It's actually a pretty boring job. And I was dead set on being infantry. That's what an 03 is. If you listen to the Biting Bullet guys or anything like that, an 03 is infantry. I was dead set. It had to be anything that started with 03. But I decided to be a reservist. And so the recruiter got so fed up with me, just threw this book and it had this list of dates when you could go to boot camp, and and I just looked down the list for the first thing it said 03, and I didn't even look at what the job was. It was with the Civil Affairs Unit. So I go off to boot camp, and this is, 2000. I don't go to boot camp until February of 2003. So Afghanistan's when I started like a freshman semester of college, and then I drop out and go to boot camp. And that's right when the Iraq War kicks off. So the whole like freshman year of college was like all the hullabaloo at the beginning, whether or not to fight in Iraq. And then I finish boot camp, come back, do a year, check into my unit. All the guys in my unit are in Iraq as it is. Like I get into my unit in June of 2003, and they're all still in Iraq. So, but I get told, like, get ready, you're going to be going back next June, like right away. So I have a year of college, and that whole time you're going to Iraq is like the next deployment was going to start in June of 2004. So in 2004, I disenrolled from college, and I I mobilized my reserve unit, and I learned what civil affairs was during we had 2 or 3 months of preparation. I kind of learned what this other non-infantry job was that I didn't really sign up for, but did. And it actually turned out kind of suiting me pretty well. So I ended up, even though I was technically an infantryman, that's what I went to school for from the Marine Corps, I got on-the-job training for what's called civil affairs. That's what that 0531 means in my profile.
Okay.
And civil affairs, in the shortest possible way to explain it, is maximize the local support and minimize their interference.
Is this part of that counterinsurgency type plan, or is that way later?
It is part of everything, actually.
Okay.
It's not really sexy for the DoD unless they're in PR trouble. You know what I mean?
Sure.
When they have PR problems, they put the civil affairs guys out front because we're the ones trying to get the civilians to like us. We're the ones, if you see people handing out soccer balls or candy bars or something like that.
That looks good.
At the very least, the civil affairs guys coordinated that. If not, we're the ones doing it. So, but also there were civil affairs guys on D-Day, coordinating, hunting down the mayor of the first village that they raised the flag on. Be like, hey, mayor, we're going to raise the French flag again. Come on out and raise the flag with us. I would have been the guy running around and be like, where's the mayor of this town?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
There's literally, I was a whole book called Soldiers Become Governors. You could find it online, but of all these examples of them doing it in World War II. And so it's always been around, but it just doesn't necessarily make the radar. Mm-hmm. Also, some less sexy things in Normandy, they started overwhelming the septic systems with all these extra soldiers around, and they had to run down and find somebody who would shovel it all out. And that would be one running around finding somebody to shovel up all the septic systems. And
that sounds like a fun job. Yeah.
Literally, when I taught at the civil affairs school, we would take people to the wherever we were doing it. We usually was in Quantico, but sometimes we would have a mobile training team. We would go. You could always find we would find examples of infrastructure to show Marines how to assess and understand how a piece of infrastructure works and how to find the guy to talk to. And one of the things you could pretty reliably find is a firehouse, a water treatment plant, and a wastewater treatment plant. So it always, whenever we were running a school, that's where we would take people to, was to the wastewater treatment plant to show them how one works. And so yeah, that's fun.
Sounds beautiful.
So kind of like a crude, or just you guys are kind of like the stagehands, so that you guys would go in and do whatever you had to do behind the scenes, so that when everyone else came in, they just kind of did what they had to do without having to think about anything.
Yeah. On a certain level, with say Fallujah, which was a big major operation where the Marines were just kicking in doors left and right, and it really could mean anything. So among the things we were doing then was, first of all, trying to get the word out that people should get out of the city if they could, and then also trying to find out, trying to find policemen that would come in and make sure looting didn't happen as soon as the battle ended, so that people would leave their homes, because most of the time people didn't want to leave their homes because they didn't want everything taken when they left.
Right.
And then the people who didn't leave, we were evacuating them by day, because the Marines were searching houses by nights, and they would kind of collect everyone up. And by day, we would collect up all these people, take them out of the city, and then we were taking a bunch of people, a religious leader and some of his parishioners back into the city, because in Muslim custom, you should bury anyone regardless of whether they were a bad guy or not by the next sunset. So we were taking them in and collecting up bodies, because that counted as civilian interference and kind of got in the way of the battle space too. So we were searching the bodies of some civilians and mostly dead bad guys, and then carrying them out of the city to get them buried, but using local customs. And we all kind of coordinated as far as we could in advance. So, and then when the whole thing was over, we were like, okay, the water system's destroyed. So we were like getting these, we hired somebody to get this, bring these giant cisterns in and fill them up with fresh water on like every major street corner. And then we were paying a guy to make sure that there was fresh water available in the city so that there wasn't some major outbreak or something.
All right. So I have a couple questions about Fallujah.
Sure.
But I want to back up just a little bit.
Yeah.
Because this is one thing I've always been curious about. Was you said when you were maybe middle school, high school, you were reading about boot camp, and then did you go to Parris Island?
Yep.
Yeah. So how did what you went through at boot camp compare to what you read about? Did you feel like you were prepared, where you kind of knew what to expect, or do they kind of push guys? Because you have all different kinds of guys in the military. You got some guys who are like, and, all different body types. You got athletes, non-athletes. Do they push you to your limit no matter who you are? Or is it kind of like, you're – I don't know. You tell me. Tell me what your experience is.
I mean, so, yes, there are definitely some very stressful points when you're just trying – when there's somebody screaming in your face telling you to do some, like, task like – tie your shoes faster or do it the exact way they want you to do it.
I'm going as fast as I can, right?
Yeah. I mean, like when you add a certain stress factor to very simple tasks, it can get very difficult, and that's kind of the point.
Right.
But like I was a bit of a lunatic. Like I was sitting there with an AR-15 assembling and disassembling it in the dark blindfolded before I went to boot camp. And like I was in pretty good shape. I could have been in better shape, but it was not particularly hard. And it was not particularly difficult for me. What I would say, and this is my own little pet theory, but I have a friend who's a Green Beret, and he's signed on to this theory too. That it's not any particular school in the military is not that challenging, or the challenge is not how hard it is. It's a question of whether it's an option to fail, and how much they make that an option. Like when you hear about BUDS, like Navy SEAL School or Ranger School or some of those things, they're constantly telling you to go home and drop out. Even like Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, which I went to and never finished. They have two. I did like there's split sessions where you could do 6 weeks and then another 6 weeks. And after my first 6 weeks, I did not choose to go back. At that point, I wanted out of the Marine Corps. I went up and down with how I felt about things until I finally came to where I am. But when I decided not to go back, like they're constantly telling you, just go home. You could go, like, this sucks, go home at OCS. It was easier than boot camp. Now, I had just been in boot camp a year earlier, so I kind of knew what was up, and it was pretty easy to know what games they were playing because the instructors are the same, more or less.
Okay.
But what makes it harder is, generally speaking, that even encouragement or enticement to quit and go home. And that there's no shame in it. You came to something hard. You can go home. Boot camp, on the other hand, isn't like you could get out of it, but you had to it was not an option. It was never presented as an option to get out of it and quit. So that makes it, yes, it's difficult if you show up unprepared in some way, but it's not, you're going to graduate. You're going to finish unless you get hurt or get recycled because you flunked something. But even then, you're going to get recycled over and over.
Did you ever know anyone that failed out of language school?
Language school?
Yeah.
I never knew anyone. I don't know that the only person I know that went to language school is my father.
Okay. Sorry, that's kind of a joke for Slappy.
Yeah. It's I didn't fail out of language school, by the way. But anyway, sorry.
Sorry, normally the inside jokes are about tractors, so there it is. Got it out of the way. No.
I missed that one at some point.
Then my next question is, so you said, I guess boot camp was February 2003. Then you got done in June of 2003.
I graduated in May of 2003, like Memorial Day weekend.
Okay.
And then
so your unit was already in Iraq?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they assign you like when you graduate, or do you know during boot camp, like I'm going to be in this group?
As a reservist, you know.
Okay.
But you also have no idea. You know what I mean? You've signed papers saying you're going to this or that unit.
But
even
it could change.
But no, it can't change. It's just that you don't know what you've signed up for until you actually show up at the unit and you find out, oh, you're going to be civil affairs. Why'd you go?
Right.
Why'd they send us an infantryman? Oh, whatever, we'll take you. I mean,
so what'd you do for a year before you went?
I went to undergrad,
Okay.
and then I went. I did another year. I did a year undergrad, and then every month you're doing your reserve drill weekends, and you're starting to learn the job. The guys came back from their deployment probably sometime around September or November, and so you meet the guys that just came back from the deployment, and they start telling you like the job. It was sort of on the job training, but only on like 1 weekend a month. So you really until like the following summer, where we like mobilized, because the Marine Corps usually you prepare like you get put on active duty about 3 months or so before you go overseas, and that whole 3 months is full time getting you ready for that deployment. So at least in the reserve side.
Okay. And then another question I had as you were talking is you were lifelong, always going to be a Marine, or always going to be in the military anyway, always going to be a Marine, Navy, whatever. You sign up, then 9/11 happens. Was that like, all right, it's go time? Like, what were you thinking? Or were you like, oh shit? Or this is what you grew up wanting to do.
Yeah. I mean, I remember it sort of felt like that ship had sailed a little, like on a certain level, almost immediately. One of my friends who was a naval officer, his dad was a naval officer. He got sent to Afghanistan, and then by the time, God, it's hard to remember that far back, but and so you finish your senior year of high school and you're doing your senior year things and, whatever, wrapped up around some girlfriend or whatever. And then it was, nothing really, nothing happened. Like Afghanistan almost immediately. I don't know how it felt to you, because you're about the same age.
Yeah, I was a senior in high school.
Like the Taliban toppled in like 6 months, and then everyone kind of forgot about it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And it wasn't until then it was immediately on the back burner as soon as the war drums for Iraq started drumming, and that was like by the following summer. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Well, the next day, like in the White House, they were already talking about it.
Yeah.
But like as soon as like Afghanistan, like Taliban toppled, it was already in the back burner. There was a little bit of like to do about Tora Bora and all that, and it made the news for a while. And almost immediately, I remember more discussion about, with friends, like, are you going to go kill Saddam or something kind of stuff, than even really talking about Afghanistan. It was very funny how they just,
quickly.
Yeah.
And at that time, I mean, in my life, if you told me there was a difference between Afghanistan and Iraq, I'd have had no idea. I said, yeah, let's kill them all. That was kind of how I was. That was probably similar to you.
There was
grew up,
definitely one sense in which that's where I might, I mean, I was not as well. I hadn't been listening to Scott Horton yet,
Yeah,
so
right.
like
Same
I
here.
was not up to speed on the difference between Iraq and Afghanistan. Like, I had a pretty good geography background, but as the way the propaganda machine at that time worked, everyone knew that Saddam had somehow backed Al-Qaeda,
and even if he didn't, he was a bad guy anyway. So
yeah,
exactly.
that was my perspective. I was a few years younger than you. I was in 8th grade for 9/11, but yeah, I remember Saddam was just a bad guy, and we should be. He's a bad guy, and we should be taking him out because freedom and all that stuff.
I mean, and it was probably pretty seamless because of that. What was that damn Hot Shots Part 2 movie too, where Saddam was always the bad guy in like other movies too, Yep. And you just kind of knew, like back somewhere in the back of your mind, there was that Saddam was gonna have to go down at some point. For like the whole 90s, he was the enemy.
He was my whole life. Saddam Hussein was the enemy. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So now you get were 2004. You're in Fallujah.
Mhm.
Now, the way I understand, I mean, the Marines kind of go in first, kind of set the stage or do whatever they do, and then the Army comes in to occupy. Is that kind of sound right? Or not really?
Generally, that's theoretically the way the Marine Corps thinks of itself.
Sure.
And where they try to sell like their purpose in life is like being able to kick in the door, and that's not false. But when it comes to counterinsurgency and these steady state operations where we're constantly in and out, that it's not like we can just be like, oh well, we kicked in the door, now it's the Army's problem for the next 20 years,
Right.
So the Marine Corps got sort of, it got the toughest chunk of, well, I'm sure there's Army guys that dispute this and I wouldn't argue with them, but theoretically Anbar province, the western Sunni province of Iraq, was the toughest chunk of Iraq. And so that was the area the Marine Corps was responsible for.
Okay.
The Marine Corps doesn't have much in the way of tanks or armor. So and also the Marine Corps isn't big enough to have taken on Fallujah all by itself. So the way it worked in Fallujah, there were two battles, first of all. The second one happened before I got there. Or the first one happened before I got there, and the second one was while I was there. The first one was when you saw those contractors took a shortcut through the city and got ambushed, and they got strung up on that bridge. And then kind of everyone went off half-cocked and tried to attack into the city, and we basically had to, call it a draw. And then, but of course, we're not going to settle for, no one was going to settle for that situation. So by the time when I was getting there, and that was in this standoff period where Fallujah was this closed off city, and we were trying. It was basically supposed to be on lockdown. Like there was sort of it was surrounded, and everyone in there was a bad guy. Was considered to be a bad guy. All the civilians were supposed to get out, and we gave them about 3 months to do that. And then right after Bush won his re-election is when we attacked in November. So as far as the Army's role, they provided a lot of the tanks, and they took 2 or 3. The whole area was divided into these sectors. So imagine the city's got a main road running through it, and cut it in half, and you don't want anyone firing towards each other. So it got a little weird, but basically every battalion, which is about 1,200 Marines or soldiers or whatever, got about a maybe 5 to 8 block wide section, and we were all moving the same direction from the north to the south through the city. You know what I mean?
So what did the city? Sorry to cut you off if you want to keep going. But so you were there after the first Battle of Fallujah. So what does the city look like at this point? Is it totally bombed out? Is it somewhat modern looking, like what we would see, or is how would you describe it?
Just not much different from any other city in Iraq at the time. It was not totally bombed out. Some of the periphery of it was. In the lead up to everything, the only real serious gunfight I got in where I shot back and anything like that was one of these times where we were driving past. Well, we were going to go somewhere northwest of the city, and show the forward air controller, the guy who Jared from Biting the Bullet would know. A forward air controller is the guy that calls in the bombs. That's basically what job was too. We were going to show him things not to blow up, like mosques or hospitals.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And as we were leaving, one of the areas, one of the outposts that was surrounding the city, came under attack. So this forward air controller was with us. So they were like, take him there, and he's going to, give them air support. And it was kind of used as an excuse to the captain at the time that showed up there was like, we're going to move the city back about 100 yards. And so basically the idea was every building, the closest buildings to this outpost, we're just going to flatten all them, regardless of any, we're in contact, and we want to push back the perimeter of the city a little bit. So we just, called in some aircraft and blew up every building within 100 yards. Like just basically flattened like one city block. So there were definitely parts that were bombed out. But generally speaking, it was still we were kind of like out. It was kind of like dark territory because when we got there, okay, so they fought to a standoff once, and then it was this area we weren't supposed to. We didn't go near. We just surrounded it. We're waiting to attack it. So, but when we attack it, it was pretty badly bombed out. Lots of areas like heavily destroyed. Every building. They basically decided another job of civil affairs would have been to under normal circumstances, I paid out a lot of battle damage claims. If we knocked over a wall of your house, I would be the one that would go over to your house and be like, sorry, we screwed that. Like, if you weren't the bad guy, then I would be the one being like, sorry, here's some money to rebuild the wall.
That's got to be tough.
It's also if we killed, if we blew up legs. I paid for that. I blew up. We shot a warning shot at the car in front of you. Because they were coming too close and it skipped off the ground and blew your jaw off. So we'll pay you for that.
I saw a documentary, I think it was on HBO, maybe it was Netflix, about Marja. And they showed that. I guess a civilian was killed accidentally and they had to go and give him like $1,000 or something. And the guy just tells the story. It's like heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking for everyone involved. It was tough.
But in Fallujah, they basically called it like blanket, like we're never going to be able to repay or find the owners. For every house was damaged to a point we would have had to pay for it. There was at least a shot, a couple good bullet holes or an explosion in every single house in that city. Because literally the Marines kicked in every single door, sometimes twice, because we'd go back through and re-clear areas.
And how long did that? I mean. The United States won the second battle. They kicked them out. They took or controlled the city, whatever. Yep. How long did that take?
So it was probably about 10 days. If I'm trying to remember, probably about 10 days to for everyone to reach this the end state. And then we did this sort of cross clearing where as an army unit pulled out because they had to go back to the army units were just surging in to help. All the units that were there gave up their areas of responsibility. That's why there were flare-ups in other parts of the country at that time because they kind of gave up their areas that they were responsible for, or sent everything they could spare to Fallujah to clear it. And then as one pulled out, you would move back through it sideways. You know what I mean? So we moved north to south, and then you moved back through east to west to make sure that no one slipped back in or anything.
Right.
So that all around took about probably clear through till sometime in December. So a little more than a month to have cleared the whole city twice and kicked in every door. Every door was kicked in twice and searched top to bottom. And then after all that's all over, they started readmitting people back into the city, and everyone had to get a new ID card and have their retina scanned and get fingerprinted. Every person that entered or exited the city.
That's interesting.
We had to lay that out and coordinate it.
So how did the people, were the people happy at that time? Or was it still kind of well, now my whole town's blown up? Or was it a good mix?
The latter. I mean, I think it was... The people that decided to come back, were definitely not pleased to have to rebuild or
right.
But also they were back in their houses and not living in a tent because a lot of them if they didn't have a family to evacuate, a family in another city to evacuate to, they were living in tents outside the city,
out in the desert somewhere or whatever, middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So it was they slowly trickled back in and eventually kind of, they rebuilt more or less. I popped in there when I went back to Iraq the second time. I went on one little mission there. They needed extra people to deliver the bankroll for retirement money. So we had to go to the central bank of Fallujah, and the city was popping. And, and the streets were crowded like I'd never seen before, So people rebuilt within a year and went back to something like normal, at the same time. It just, at first it was like, a little bit, not individually shell shocked, but just like shocked at what had done to their city,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
It would be like if, whatever happened, if it happened in this country, something gets all twisted up and everything, and you come back and well, exactly like you said, you go, man. But then we're all humans, and you got to rebuild and get on with your life. And it sounds like they did, which is good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For some perspective, one of my friends did. Some of our guys went down to help out in New Orleans after Katrina, and they said it was about comparable.
Wow.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
That's really good. I'm glad you kind of said that, because that's really good perspective. Because it's tough to put ourselves in shoes in the shoes like that, because it's on the other side of the world. A lot of it's desert. Most people, including myself, have never been over there. I probably never will be. And they're Muslims. They look different from me. They dress different from me. It's difficult to kind of put yourself in those shoes. But when you put it like that, and they just sound like normal people.
Yeah. Well, that actually, that was one of my. So the best way to maximize civilian support, or at least stop us from doing anything really stupid that would piss us off or piss the people off, was to try to talk to Marines beforehand and try to get through on that level. And it was actually during my second deployment that I started to have the genesis of this thought that I would use sometimes when I was teaching Marines later. I'm sure we probably share similar thoughts about the Constitution, but it's useful for people to talk to people who believe in it on their level. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I would use all the time, it kind of started to click on my second deployment. That's where I really got my first deployment. Everything really went well, if you could say, believe it or not. I had a good team leader. I fought the good fight. We killed all the bad guys. We killed all the bad guys. We did a really good job trying to help people and all these things. I really I had proven myself as a Marine. I had been shot at and shot back and all that. And my second deployment, they did not send me back to Fallujah, which right there, the second deployment was the same unit, but they changed the command. That's usually in the Marine Corps and the military in general. The commanding officer is changed every 3 years as a rule. They have to rotate someplace else.
Okay.
And so they had changed the command, and this new commanding officer comes in, and the first thing my team leader from my previous deployment says to me when he meets the commanding officer, this colonel, is, "Don't go overseas with him." This is my captain,
oh boy,
my team leader, saying, "Don't go anywhere with this man."
Wow.
You know what I mean? Dumber than a box of rocks. Wow. And that proved pretty true, because my second time overseas, our unit overall it would have made sense for the civil affairs guys who had done these projects. We were out on the back end of the Fallujah thing. We built it got torn to shreds, but we built a soccer field in the middle of the city, and we rebuilt this, we paid to rebuild some certain things. And out in Rupa, where I went the second time, at that same time, some Marines from my same unit had refurbished a hospital for more than $1 million, right? Well, when I go to Rupa, they send me to Rupa the second time. And I don't know any of the local people. I don't know the contractor. With the contractor that had done a lot of our work for us, we had a good relationship with them. You know what I mean?
Right.
We do things for us, deliver water on time, do this or that,
Now you're starting over.
We knew who the mayor was, we knew every street in the city, And now it's, well, you're going to Rupa. Well, okay. I don't know anybody there. And one of the things, I just remember pulling my hair out trying to look through, paper files to find where on God's green earth this hospital was, because we got an order to follow up on it. We spent $1 million on this hospital. Go check up on it, right?
Yeah.
And nobody knows where it is. No. No. And I'm not even kidding.
Now, how big a town is Rupa? Is it, would you consider, it's not like a major city, is it?
No. I mean, it's hard to really compare. I would probably compare it to like a big truck stop town.
Okay.
You know, you couldn't
somewhere in the Midwest, like in Elkhart, Indiana.
Huh?
Like in Elkhart, Indiana, Midwest truck. Yeah, right off the highway.
Maybe you guys are Pennsylvania. What's that town where like 68 splits with 70? It doesn't matter. It's where my friend used to have. Anyways, so like a big truck stop town is the best way to describe it. Like,
okay.
In any case, it wasn't that big of a place, but like we couldn't find the hospital, you know, or at least we couldn't find one that looked like it had $1 million spent.
That's incredible.
You know, and we couldn't find anyone that they had talked to that like the contractor who had done the job. You know, that guy probably just ran off with the money and never built anything. I was
going to say, did they just take the money, or
yeah,
I've heard that happens.
You see, just like Americans, just like us.
Yeah, yeah. No, so then they get in at some point. The other thing that happens is, the Marine Corps is different, and there's a reason for the Marine Corps has to rotate units on and off of boats every 7 months. The Navy has their ships go out 7 months at a time. And so the boats that the Marine Corps send, the amphibious assault craft and stuff the Marine Corps sends Marines on, needs to rotate in and out every 7 months. So a Marine deployment is 7 months, whether it's on a boat or to Iraq. An Army deployment is somewhere between 12 and 18 months. It's much longer term. And the reason that's relevant is every time a Marine unit came in, they came in full of piss and vinegar and wanted to do this whole new operation and start over from scratch. And I don't know if you've ever taken over from somebody else in their job, but the first thing you see is everything they were doing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you replace someone in your job, like why'd they do that? Why'd they do that? So every 7 months, you'd have these guys ripping in, something in place, relief in place. You'd have a new unit rip in, and they would want to change everything. And so this unit rips into Rutba, and they're immediately convinced that this is the commander of this unit is convinced that this is Fallujah 2.0, because once a week there was this guy that would come up to the top of this hill and take a pot shot. He shot a guy in the neck once. He shot at me once. But there was this guy that would come up on the top of this hill and take a pot shot at the Marines in this one base. And
that's
so
ballsy,
the commander of the unit,
huh? So that's pretty ballsy. What's his deal? Like, is it on by himself? Would just take shots at the Marines?
Yeah, there were about like 3 guys, and they had an AR-15, and it was sort of. It's hard to explain. Like, it's not worth going into all the details.
Sure, that's fine.
But there was basically like cars had to, for whatever reason, there was this checkpoint where everyone had to pass through, and it was probably just that he was annoyed that there was like a toll plaza where everyone had to stop and get their car searched every time they left the city.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but there would be this cluster of cars, and he would hide out among this cluster of cars and take a pot shot at us from in there.
Right.
And then on more than one occasion, some dumb Marine would not just like hunker down and, whatever, let it slide. They would open up with the machine gun at all these cars that are sitting at the top of this hill, waiting for their turn to leave the city. And so the people would all go running helter-skelter, flipping out back down the backside of the cars and hiding.
Sure.
And luckily, no one ever got hurt. I was there, but it was like, in any case, I would go out and tell. I remember there was one time there were some new Marines that wanted to, to use it. They wanted to. I want to use the word "pop their blank," but I'm not sure if we use like that with you guys.
Yeah, sure, whatever.
Pop their cherry. Fine. There were some Marines there that wanted to pop their cherry.
Sure.
And they go rushing out when they hear the shot. And they want to shoot everything, and I go out screaming at them, like, get back behind cover. Like, shut up, don't do that. Like, They didn't even have – these were, like, engineer Marines. They were, like, water – they were water boys. They were delivering shower water, but they wanted to get their shots off.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? So I was, like, yelling at them to not get involved and not start shooting people up as the civil affairs guy, Right. So anyways – all this is to say that they decided to do a clearing operation to the city. 4 nights we were going to search. It took about 3-4 nights to search every house in that city to give you an idea of the scale.
Right.
And, of course, when we were searching each house in the city, we decided, and there was this plan that we weren't going to carry backpacks or anything. We were just going to sleep in their bedrooms, take all their bedding, and then lock up whoever. Either tell the person to kick the person out in the middle, and like when the sun came up, we would stop searching because the sniper threat was so bad that it couldn't be out at daylight. So when the sun came up, we were going to take over someone's house, kick them out, tell them to go somewhere else, and then stay there until the sun went back down. And naturally, something happened. We picked the tallest house. Who has the tallest house? The richest people in town. You know what I mean? So we basically just went around kicking all the most important people in this town out of their houses. And like and the plan was to take their bedding and sleep in that. And I was like, this seems like a really dumb idea. Like, it's winter. It snows out in that part of Iraq sometimes. Like, this doesn't seem cool to just be like, hey, you can't bring anything with you. You have to leave, though. Anyways, and that's where the quartering act, or the Third Amendment, all of a sudden made a ton of sense to me.
Wow. Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it was like, this is why. I remember learning the Third Amendment. Right? Who cares about that?
Right.
And it's like, well, I guarantee you the Brits did the same thing.
Yep.
They're going to quarter in the nicest house they can find, you know?
That's funny because when I was younger, when you read about that, you're like, did they really? Why were they doing that? What, are they just coming in and, then our guys do that too, huh?
Yeah. And so that was like this light bulb moment, and everything went kind of, not badly, nothing went horrifically wrong in that deployment, but I just lost a lot of faith in the Marine Corps and didn't really think that it was like, it needed to be better at the very least. I thought I might try to, fix it from the inside. And one of my little sales pitches started to be like, look, this is why you can't, the Fourth Amendment the whole Bill of Rights is a counterinsurgency document. It's the insurgents' perspective on the things that made them go from being annoyed to killing Brits. You know what I mean?
Right. That's a good point.
It's literally, they came to take the guns. And that's like Boogaloo time.
Yep. No, that makes sense.
And so when you have a government that starts whittling, whether it's an occupying force or not, that starts whittling away. First, we're going to take away the Fourth Amendment. Then we're going to take away the Third. And then, this is the kind of stuff. And when we stop and search people for no reason, like, people are willing to be searched. If I'm going, I don't know, there's times and places. If I was going into I don't go to a divey bar, but if I wouldn't really I would roll my eyes, but I'd be okay if I was going to some bar in a town I'd never been to. I'd probably just turn around and leave. But you know what I mean? Like, yeah, okay,
right.
They want this place to be safe. It's their, you know what I mean, for whatever reason. But when you're just stopped and searched for things that don't make sense, that would irritate everyone.
Of course.
And so I started trying to get through to Marines, like, let's try not to piss people off. You know what I mean? Right. They're not, like, we're going to reduce the chances of them shooting at us and fighting us. And I took that to Afghanistan with me. Was like a lot of like talking it over with Marines. Also, I was picking up rank and people would listen to me and I had some credibility, and I would talk to them about like, look, this is, why did you search that? Why did you were out on patrol and you stopped everyone that came near your patrol and searched them. And I would talk through like, well, and every time you did that, you just stopped what you were doing and made yourself a target. You know what I mean? And meanwhile, like the guy could have just driven around us. It's desert. He could have gone like 50 yards off to the left and you would have left him alone. But because he was coming close to you, you felt the need to like accost him, know? Right. Like, what good are you doing? And
man, it's I don't know if you're doing this on purpose, but you're like making this, your story over there makes so much sense for what goes on here. Because it's the same thing I say about the police here. It's like, man, you guys would just eliminate so many threats against you if you just didn't engage so much. Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm not doing that on purpose, but it's true. It's just the reality. There are certain things, call them rights, call them whatever you want. It's things that piss people off when you keep doing them to people all the time.
Yeah,
exactly. If you do certain things, you'll tick them off. And so I started trying to talk to the Marines I worked with, because I was still doing the civil affairs job, but I was talking to the infantry Marines and telling them like, hey, this is some stuff you shouldn't do. Like, where are the redcoats here? You know what I mean?
That's pretty impressive, actually. To realize, was that a common realization with people?
No,
And I wouldn't think
so. Go over well. It was,
Right.
it was an uphill battle.
So at this point, were you reading Rothbard? Did any of this come into your mind, or were you still just constitutionalist?
Still pretty much. So yeah, I was disappointed in the Marine Corps. I was trying to fix it. I was still, I would have called myself a libertarian. I had gotten, like when I said the thing about Tom Woods, I had sort of weirdly come to the perspective that really we needed to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan, but sort of I definitely knew we needed to get out of them.
This is back in 06 or so?
Yeah, I started to come around to that. By 2009, it was like, well, we just need to like get on a good footing and get out.
Gotcha.
I sort of also had come to this is where Max Boot and Tom Woods come into play. Around 2004, when Tom Woods' like politically incorrect guide came out, I like cherry picked from that was the problem. I didn't I didn't go cover to cover on it,
Sure.
And I didn't start absorbing Rothbard or anything like that. I had the book and I would cherry pick it to make like constitutionalist arguments or like certain arguments in history classes while I was an undergrad, because I was a history major and a political science major. So, and what was my other? I had one more. International relations. So I was cherry picking from Tom Woods' stuff and not really much beyond that. At the same time, I picked up like Savage Wars of Peace, and I kind of came to the conclusion that, which is Max Boot's like, there's 200 occasions where we've gone to war without congressional authorization. That's like his seminal work on that. And I sort of came to the conclusion that if you're gonna go to war, and this is perfectly like I'm 100% anti-war, but if there was something so bad that that we didn't need a draft, we didn't need a Federal Reserve, that Congress and all of the people were willing to volunteer and fight in it, it probably would be something I might be willing to be. I would definitely be more okay with that.
Certainly. And
what I mean?
Go in and get it done, right? Like, let's not spend 20 years and trillions of dollars. I came to the conclusion that if you're gonna fight a war, it needs to be like nasty, brutish, and short. You know? Yeah.
Like it should be as brutal and quick as possible, and in the long run, you'd be better off. Right. It has to be something where you're willing to like raise the black flag over. Mm-hmm. And that's where I was at that point. And now I'm kind of just at the point where there's nothing worth that.
Right.
It's hard to imagine anything that would be worth that happening. Right. You know what I mean?
Outside of like a Red Dawn event.
Yeah. Honestly, the most likely black flag event would be our own government,
Right.
Sure.
But so I'm doing that. I come home. I go to Haiti for like they had that terrible earthquake in January 2010, and frankly, I'm not a big fan of the winter. I had just been in Afghanistan, and I'm not a religious person like at all, but I actually kind of prayed on that one, and I just decided like I had just gotten home like a week before from Afghanistan, and they asked for volunteers from our job to go help, and that was actually pretty great. Like the Marine Corps did do some good things there. Mm-hmm. There were some funny moments there too with we sent a bunch of food and we were making water, and their water supply was disrupted, at least like their well water, because an earthquake will do that. Sure. But their food supply wasn't really disrupted. Like their imports of some staples were, but people were doing it fine, except that they're, as it turns out, and this is where like they're a remittance dependent economy. They needed money sent home. They needed money sent so they could buy food from people, from their family members in Miami. Mm-hmm. And they were all like lining up at the Western Union every day to see if they could get money, but the power was out. So the Marines are going around delivering food, and I'm the civil affairs guy who's supposed to figure out what the real problem is and fix it. But all we have is food, so every problem looks like a nail. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, and the Marines are getting you have these sort of different story, but you have submarines, these intel Marines running around trying to find out who these criminals are who are buying the MREs. So we're giving out tons of MREs, and there are these guys running around buying them up. They're buying them up because they're shelf stable and the people are desperate for cash.
Yeah, sure.
It's like, I'm going to save this stuff for hurricane season and sell it back.
Yeah.
Right? And right now, people
speculating.
And the intel Marines are running around wanting to arrest the guy.
Oh, of course.
You know? And make him give back all the MREs he took. But he was buying them because the people needed money.
Yeah.
And so I was the one that like figured out, well, we need to get the electricity on. Like after talking to enough people, it's like we need to find the power plant and get the electricity running.
Let's get that running, yeah.
Running, all of their family members are going to be sending a mountain of cash to them, and this problem will go away. So that was fun. I took all of that kind of, and I put it together. I went on one more deployment, basically just sheerly for economic reasons. I graduated in 2000. I graduated in 2008. I deployed in 2009. I came home from Haiti in 2010. And for about a year, I sat around and couldn't get a job because it was the recession era. Mm-hmm. I worked as a doorman at a bar in Annapolis and stayed at my dad's house, you know?
Yep.
And I like part-timed as a civil affairs instructor. So I did one more deployment, and then I got a full-time spot as an instructor for my job. And then I started actually teaching at the Coin Academy, which is like we would go to units before they deployed and teach them counterinsurgency, and I would give them all these little anecdotes. So that was all pretty cool. And then it was only while I was at the Civil Affairs School, so after 2012, that Tom Woods had just started his podcast. And that was finally like what brought me around. And the biggest thing to get over was the war thing, and also the what about when you started to get into like private security companies, like what's to stop them from becoming warlords kind of thing was like the biggest hurdle. But like,
which I think is pretty normal for all of us.
For most of us when we were coming around. Yeah.
So that's where I finally like came all the way around, and I really, and then when I looked back, I really started to get into like realize like all the things that I could also always justify my job because it was really trying to mitigate harm by the Marine Corps. You know, my main job was to keep us from blowing up a mosque or a hospital. I'd be like, number one is put big red X's on the map. Don't blow this up, guys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I could always kind of justify my job, even though when I started to question the bigger picture, you know, and I was always the one trying to like reform the system from within and try to fix it, you know. But eventually, you know, my reserve unit got shut down, and that's when I ended up switching to the Guard. But before that, I moved to the anti-war thing when I was in grad school, and I'm 100% on board now. And my biggest thing right now is the Defend the Guard Act and trying. I thought it would be a lot easier to get Maryland with like a super majority in their House of Delegates and State Senate to consider the Defend the Guard Act, but it's gone nowhere. And
So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Defend the Guard Act was a idea that Pat McGeehan, who's an Air Force vet and a delegate for West Virginia, cooked up. And the idea is like, okay, Congress has basically failed to do its duty and deal with the wars at all. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And there doesn't seem to be any turning that ship. They're too much in the bag. And so the idea, this was actually, you know, he was coming, and in Maryland, I try my best to take a tack that a more Democratic-leaning state would be open to. But the idea was to attack the right from the right and use the Constitution from Pat McGeehan's perspective and say, hey, look, you can't use our National Guard, our state's National Guard, except for in the case of declared wars. So he came up with this concept called the Defend the Guard Act, and it basically is, it's in those terms. The Maryland National Guard or the state National Guard can only be used if Congress declares a war. And it kind of would force the ball into Congress's court, either declare a war or you can't use the National Guard anymore.
That's interesting. So, I mean, I didn't even realize that the National Guard can't be used unless it's a declared war. I'm sure the National Guard has been used in all of our undeclared wars, have they?
They have, and pretty intensely. I mean, at one point, I think about half the forces in Iraq were National Guard. Right now, I just was watching a thing from Dan McKnight, who's another guy from the Defend the Guard movement, and he has it at 30,000 deployed right now. I have, in the midst of this crisis, I was poking around today, and there's like 55 medics from the Georgia National Guard overseas. There's a Maryland logistical unit. There's a Michigan ambulance company in Kuwait. There's MPs galore all over Kuwait and Afghanistan, even like right now as we speak. And they're all being used just under the authorization of use of military force. Now, as it stands, no one's challenged it. It's never seen court whether this law would hold up or not.
Of course.
But basically, it's the state saying it's the state saying you can't. Like, we're not going to release our National Guard unless you've declared war.
Right.
So it's trying to sort of nullify or interpose the states into this system.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, like, I mean, you know, the war in Afghanistan hinges on like there's like maybe 9 or 10 A-10 squadrons. There's like an attack aircraft that do close air support.
Mm-hmm.
And those go in and out every 4 months, and every two years they have to be back in there. They have a constant cycle of aircraft coming in, of like units going in and out of Afghanistan doing close air support. And it's only the one type of aircraft, and they're in limited supply. And if Idaho or Maryland or I think Michigan are the states that have them in the National Guard just said, you can't use them, the whole cycle goes out of whack. And they'd have to do something. Congress would either have to declare war or like act to take that unit away from the states. And either way, it would have to be an affirmative act moving through Congress in some way, shape, or form to decide what do we want to do here. Because these wars definitely have to end. They're not going anywhere. They're just wasting lives. Mm-hmm. And so the idea is to try to get as many state legislatures as possible to pass a similarly phrased bill out of the 10th Amendment Center to say, hey, look, you can't use our guard in war unless you've declared one.
Okay, so you are using Michael Bolden. 'Cause I was about to say, like, this sounds very Michael Bolden, the 10th Amendment Center type thing.
Yeah, I think it was sort of, I think to hear Pat McGeehan explain it, it was sort of like simultaneous construction, and then and then a meeting of the minds.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where they cooked it up. As of right now, there hasn't been any success in any states. It would really only take 1 or 2 states it would honestly only take one state that has like a mission essential unit, or 1 or 2 states that don't, to throw a real wrench in the works, you know? So
yeah, I mean, man, I love hearing strategies like this because it's different, but and it might seem like small or whatever, but like you said, if it takes 1 or 2 things and it just, you know, grinds the beast to a halt potentially, as opposed to being like, well, we got to convince all of our congressmen to vote this way and everything. We'll just route around them.
Yeah, and I really thought that this would be an easy win for, like, you know, it was the Maryland State Assembly. I'm just talking Maryland as an example. Like, you know, it was starting up right after the last flare-up in Iran, and I was like, do you really want, as a super majority Democratic state, you know what I mean? Do you really want Trump to be able to just send Maryland's National Guard overseas?
Right.
You know what I mean? In this war, you don't agree with this war, right? Like, this thing with Iran is not a good idea. You don't agree with it, right? So why not just take that tool out of his toolbox and just stonewalled?
You would think that would be an easy sell.
Yeah, I would have thought. And I'm going to re-attack them, actually. I'm already late in doing it. But with the COVID thing, it's like, you know, there's a Maryland logistical unit, a medical logistical unit that's in Poland right now, which is technically that's a training mission. So the Defend the Guard Act wouldn't apply to that. But it's like there will be in the there's guard units out of every state, like somewhere they're not supposed to be, when everyone is clamoring, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but everyone's clamoring for the National Guard to help.
Right.
You know what I mean? Everyone expects the National Guard to do something about this virus, you know? And where are they? Like, the people of Georgia should be like, where the hell are our medics? And the people of Michigan should be like, where's our air ambulance National Guard unit right now? What are they doing in Kuwait? You know? Why aren't they home to do this? You know?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't think people
No.
would.
What kind of pushback are you getting? Any at all? Like, I mean, are they responding? Are you getting anywhere?
I tweet stormed. That's where I only started my Twitter at first when I realized one of my state delegates engaged on Twitter somewhat regularly.
Okay.
That's the only reason I avoided Twitter before this, because it hasn't necessarily been a healthy thing for me. But I started with like sort of an emailing campaign, and I came to some of their not campaign events, but fundraising events. And I would just kind of get this benign, well, that's interesting, you know? And I went to the local newspapers, and they said, well, if it's not a bill and the president of the state Senate, so the highest legislator in the state, he responded to me. He's my state senator. He responded to me and said, his name's Bill Ferguson, and I don't mind calling him out on it, but he said, if there should happen to be any conversation about this, I'd be interested to consider it further. And it's like, well, fuck you, man.
What? Isn't that your job? Right?
Start a conversation. It should be you. You're the president of a majority state delegation. You know?
Right.
You can tell every Democrat in the state what to do, and they'll do it. And you're waiting for the conversation to start, you know? So I kind of want to reinitiate with him and be like, you know, where's our National Guard right now? What gives? Like, you know?
Bring them home.
Yeah. And the other thing about that, too, is when you think about the National Guard, like half these people, and knowing them, half of them are cops. In fact, one of my friends, he was a Marine in my first, second, and third deployment, and he actually switched to the National Guard too, and then he's now a pharmacist for the VA. But he has his friends are still in the Maryland Guard, and they've been mobilized, and they can't fight a virus. They're infantry soldiers, so they're all sitting around cleaning and working out, but they're mobilized to fight the virus. But the thing is, if you meet 90, I would say half of the people in the National Guard that you meet, their day job is either cop or firefighter or EMT. Mm-hmm. So you mobilize them to fight the virus, or you mobilize them to send them to Iraq, and you shortchange a police department of a shift. You know? Mm-hmm. People don't even recognize that, like, especially when you're dealing with the Reserves National Guard, you're taking people out of their day-to-day lives where they are contributing members of society, theoretically. I mean, maybe not the cops, but you know.
That's another good point. Once you start breaking it down, you start seeing how how negative all those effects are when you just do this one. Well, you think that there's a reserve unit or a National Guard unit, and so they're going to get sent out, but then.
Yeah, and it's part of the deal, and you know it going in. But like one of my friends was like, he was a contractor. He was a sole proprietor. He had a truck, and he went around and did business, and he just had to sell his truck off and lost his business when he deployed.
Yeah,
you know,
and you got to start over when you come back.
And then there's all these there's the USERA. I just referred to as USERA, but it's the employer protection for the Guard and Reserve. So if you're a guardsman or a reservist and you're deployed, your job has to keep your job open for you. You have to hire an attempt to replace you, or just not replace you until you come back. So that's like, if it's a private business, they're just like losing money on the deal and just have to suck that up when they hire a reservist or a guardsman. You know,
and they might not be.
They get deployed. It's the risk they have to take, that like, oh, well, you know, if he gets pulled away, then I'm just going to eat that, you know?
Yeah, it makes you more difficult. It makes you less employable, too. for someone knowing it's like, oh, we're gonna just get kind of taken away.
Yeah, and it hurts the productive side of society.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah. So,
what's up?
So, one last question.
Sure.
How has you know, being anti-war and pretty outspoken about it, how's that gone over with your fellow vets? Are they intrigued? Do they agree? Do you get in some arguments, or how does that go?
I play that pretty close to the chest with like the guard unit I'm part of. And there's like one guy who's kind of a Bernie dude who I'll go around it with, and you know, he's mainly on board, but it would go over about like a lead balloon. Yeah. Generally speaking, every now and then, if you see the opening where somebody, you know, where you could talk to people about it, you could also hedge around talking about libertarian-ish things like the drug war or something like that.
Sure.
And there's plenty of spitballing about politics, but there, you know, it's not something I'm going to stick out there, especially with the Defend the Guard Act. I'm mildly like one of the things that the federal government theoretically could hold over their head is closing down that unit. And there's a certain number of people who work full time at every guard unit, you know, like keep the lights on and whatnot.
Yeah.
So it would be, and they're the people that actually run things. So if word were to get around that I was the one that caused their unit to be shut down, I would not be a popular one.
Yeah, I was going to say that wouldn't make you very popular.
I you know, I could take it, but in any case, if I see the opportunity, I'm not afraid to bring it up, but I wait until the opportunity presents itself at work, you know?
Sure.
But among my friends, they know where I stand, more or less. I mean, I've definitely gone like probably my old Marine buddies. I'm actually getting married in a few months, and
congrats.
Congrats.
When I see them again, I mean, some of them know, but by the time I took the really hard anti-war turn, I also like got away from Facebook because
smart move.
I shut down my social media, so like. They already knew the direction I was going, but at this point, it doesn't come up. We just talk about old time, you know.
Sure.
Just talk
about your buddies. Talk about your buddies. Yeah.
Yeah.
So was that somewhat of a liberating feel to just be anti-war? All those questions in your head, at least in your mind now, have been solved. Was that like a nice feeling, or was it kind of, I don't know, still conflicting in you?
Yeah, no, it's still not. It's challenging for a few reasons. It's challenging because looking back, like, you know, was I the bad guy or was I the good guy? Was I the person trying to fight from the inside for the good, or was I just enabling? You know what I mean? People talk about this all the time. Like, can a libertarian work for a government job? Well, what if that libertarian is working to minimize the harms of the state, you know?
Walter Block says only a libertarian should take state assistance because they'll put it to libertarian uses.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at, is that I think of that in those terms. I struggle most with still getting a paycheck from them and still going along with it, you know? The fact that I'm still trying to get my retirement pay out of the deal and bilk the taxpayer for whatever welfare that they'll pay me until they stop. That's a struggle for me, being okay with that.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I'd much rather have tax money going to you than someone who doesn't have your views have it. So, you know.
Yeah, and if you don't take it, it's not like it's going to be saved.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, so like there's that, and then there's, you know, and not it's probably a little bit late, but there, you know, there was one incident where me and a friend basically shot up a car with some civilians in it. It was one of those incidents that happens where you think you think it's a bad guy attacking you and it's not.
Yeah.
You know? So then, like, recognizing this whole thing, there was a big period too, like especially with Iraq. sunk cost fallacy came in, and Afghanistan too. One of my friends died in Afghanistan, and it's like the sunk cost fallacy kind of sinks in and says, well, you got to make it right now,
Sure.
So, and it kind of makes it, the more actually anti-war I become, the more time I spend thinking about civilian casualties of war, which are really the biggest part.
Of course.
The more time I start thinking about it, the more time I think about, like, I paid that guy off because his jaw got blown off, but, like, what's he doing now? Right. Or, like, even the contractor, I was looking at some pictures before this in case you wanted any pictures for anything or whatever. And, like, the contractor we worked with in Iraq, I know that, like, a year and a half later, both of the contractors were murdered, and they had kids. They were murdered for working with us. You know what I mean? And, like, so then I was thinking, well, what are his orphan children doing now?
Right.
They're in their 20s, you know? And then I think about, the girl in Afghanistan who's got her legs, like, maimed by errant mortar, and, like, where's she got? Her family got $2,500 from the U.S. government, and they got free medical care until she was healed. Where's she gonna be? What's gonna happen to her? So the more I kind of think about those, the more it drives me a little bit, but it also, and it's something I want to share with people that maybe isn't easy to share. Like, I want people to feel that, like, thinking about, like, those people and what's going to happen to them and to orphans, Yeah. And so it makes it a little bit heavier in a way. It's a good burden because it reminds me to do the right things and, get on the phone and write an email to the congressman and whatever, but it's not always pleasant either,
I can imagine. It's
can imagine.
Yeah,
man.
I
That's
can't
heartbreaking, and that's big on you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I'm real glad that you're able to turn it into something positive and make something good out of it and try to correct it. It can be very easy to I don't blame anyone for if they're not able to do. I mean, it's a huge burden to have, no matter what you did over there.
Yeah,
so,
it was a lot.
Hats off.
Yeah, it was a lot easier. Like I said, we shot up this car with some civilians in it, and it was a lot easier when it was just, we did everything right. We did the best we could. We had the signs out. We were in the middle of a battle. There were tanks shooting. There were bombs dropping from planes, and he should have known better, and it was just a mistake. That was easier to deal with than he never should have been put in that situation in the first place, and we're the ones responsible for that, and I have to undo putting him in that situation.
Right.
It's a lot more. And I think that's a lot of when Marines are conflicted, it's because when I drank too much and I beat myself up too. I wouldn't have said that I had PTSD or anything. I still wouldn't say I ever had that, but I definitely had a lot of emotional challenges for the few years after that until I came around to being more anti-war and more trying to fix it and make things better. And I think that's a lot. There are tens of thousands of Marines. There's so many civilian casualties that we're not just. The worst events are some aircraft that blows up a wedding for sure, but there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of times a Marine or soldier shot an innocent person. They may have lived, they may have died. They got paid. Most of them probably got paid by a civil affairs guy. I imagine that person has the Marine or soldier that shot them has a conscience that it weighs on them a little bit.
Sure.
And them justifying it and rationalizing it doesn't relieve them necessarily.
Sure.
So, what a downer.
Well,
go ahead.
No. If is there anything else you wanted to plug or add, or you mentioned you may have a free market success story?
Just the free market. Yeah. So defendtheguard.us is the most important thing. I probably should have led with that at least a little bit, but that's the most important thing I want everyone to look into. I'd love if everyone who heard this just ask their delegate from their state representative if any guardsmen that should be here right now are in Kuwait or Afghanistan or Iraq and or Syria. I think the South Carolina guards guarding oil fields in Syria right now. That's the most important takeaway.
That's defendtheguard.us.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll throw that in the show notes page.
Yeah, I mean, any state, especially since most state legislatures are on like a pause right now, it might be a time to kind of engage them before they finish out their sessions. A lot of them had to like halt their sessions midstream, so it might be a good time to be like, hey, it's not too late. And then free market success story wise, I was just thinking about the fact that in spite of like Maryland, we've been on lockdown for 2 weeks, restaurants and bars have been closed and schools are closed and all that. And in spite of this massive state intervention, the lights are still on. I could still get takeout for dinner tonight. Mm-hmm. More or less everything is like the needs are being met by the free market in spite of this massive imposition, even though there are it's definitely doing damage. But the fact that the free market still adjust is incredible.
And they are. All these restaurants that you sit down in, you see signs outside that say, we do takeout, we're still open. They're adjusting on the fly, changing the way they operate. That's a good one.
Yeah, and also just the fact that and God knows, I think the first thing that got us talking was the fact that people are seeing it maybe this regulation shouldn't be here. Like, why can't a nurse from Connecticut work in Rhode Island? This is stupid.
Right. But when we really need them, then it's no longer a problem.
Yeah. And the biggest part too, Philly and Baltimore, prostitution, drugs are all not being prosecuted. I was just listening to the Baltimore police commissioner yesterday talk about how they've sat down with the DA and they don't even want cops to touch anyone for a nonviolent crime. And yet it doesn't seem like the city's on fire.
City's not falling apart.
Sex workers and drug dealers can go about their business freely now, and no one and the city is not falling apart. And so that's another success of the free market where actually probably without the cops, things could be better.
Would be a lot better and there'd be a lot less crime.
Yeah. So that's where the free market, we freed the market significantly in some ways this week, and that's the success story.
And that is a success.
I like it. So do you want to tell people if you want them to find you on Twitter where they can find you?
Yeah. It's at MD for Maryland, Vet4. I was going for Vet4Peace, but I guess that was taken. So it's at MDVet4. All
righty. That'll be on the show notes page along with the link for Defend the Guard Act. That'll be at mcflugel.com/190. Yeah, man, thanks for coming on. This was really good. Thank you for sharing your story. I think it's important that we get these stories out, and because each one's a little bit different. And so it's always nice to hear the different stories and how you get there and how it can, even though Slappy and I were saying before, neither of us were in the military, neither of us will probably ever go to the Middle East, but your perspective helps us see the way things are in our own lives a little bit. So appreciate you coming on and sharing everything.
Thank you. No, it was awesome. I'm really happy I got the opportunity.
Alrighty, you can stick around once I sign off here. But thanks for listening, everyone, and we will see you next week.
Peace.
Uh-oh. What's going on here?
Tell me.